What in God's name do you think you are doing?" The voice was not just loud. It was a razor blade slicing through the sterile, hushed air of the 50th floor. Ryland Cole froze, his hand still outstretched. The small red rubber ball he had just rolled came to a soft stop a few inches from the silent wheels of a child's custom-built wheelchair. Aliana Velez, CEO of Velez Financial, stood in the doorway of her glass-walled office, her face a mask of cold fury. Beside her, her stepbrother Julian placed a hand on her arm, his expression a perfect blend of shock and paternal concern. "Aliana, my God," Julian murmured, his voice just loud enough to carry. "That's just sickening." Ryland straightened up slowly. He was a man built to go unnoticed. Worn jeans, a gray janitor's polo, and the kind of quiet stillness that allowed him to blend in with the furniture. But now, under the CEO's furious gaze, he felt 100 feet tall and made of glass. He opened his mouth to explain, to tell her what he'd seen, but Aliana was already moving toward him, her heels clicking like gunshots on the polished marble. "You," she hissed, her voice dropping to a dangerously low tremble. "Look at me. Do you find this funny? Do you think my daughter's life is a game?" Ryland finally found his voice, keeping it low and steady. "Ma'am, I didn't mean any harm. I just saw—" "You saw a child who can't walk," Julian cut in smoothly, stepping in front of Aliana as if to shield her. "And you thought it would be amusing to roll a ball at her? What kind of monster does that?" Ryland's eyes flickered from Julian's polished smile to the little girl in the chair. Naya, 7 years old, with her mother's dark eyes and a silence that seemed too heavy for her small frame. She hadn't made a sound. She just stared at the red ball, her small hands clutching a worn, stuffed fox. It was in those hands, in the way she'd dropped the fox a moment ago, that he'd seen it. As the toy hit the floor, her left leg, thin and still beneath a soft pink blanket, had twitched. It wasn't a spasm. It was a reaction. A clear, unmistakable plantar reflex. An impulse that shot from the brain to the foot, a signal the doctors swore she'd lost forever. The ball hadn't been a joke. It had been a test. A desperate, impulsive, and incredibly stupid test. "I'm a former physical therapist," Ryland began, the words feeling foreign and useless in his mouth. "I saw a nerve response. The ball was just to confirm—" "A physical therapist?" Aliana laughed, a short, brittle sound devoid of humor. "And now you're a janitor. I think that tells me everything I need to know about your professional judgment. You're fired." The words hung in the air, absolute and final. "Get him out of my sight." Julian nodded curtly to the security guard who had appeared silently in the hallway. "You heard her. Your services are no longer required." Ryland didn't protest. He knew it was useless. He looked at Nia one last time. Her eyes met his for a fraction of a second, and in them, he saw not confusion, but a flicker of something else. Fear, but not of him. The guard took his elbow, his grip firm, but not rough. As he was led toward the service elevator, Ryland heard Aliana's voice. Softer now, but aching with pain. "It's okay, sweetie. He's gone. The bad man is gone." The elevator doors slid shut, and Ryland Cole, the janitor who saw too much, disappeared from the 50th floor. The automatic doors of the Velez Financial Tower hissed open, spitting him out onto the bustling sidewalk. The city air felt thick and heavy in his lungs. His temporary access badge was gone, his final paycheck promised in the mail. In less than 10 minutes, his chance at a stable life had evaporated. He walked without seeing, his mind replaying the scene. He hadn't just lost a job. He'd lost the extra $200 a week that would have finally gotten him and his daughter, Isla, out of their cramped, one-bedroom apartment. He'd lost the decent health insurance he desperately needed for her asthma. He'd lost the quiet night shifts that allowed him to be there to make her breakfast every single morning. He pulled out his phone and looked at the picture on his lock screen. Isla, 9 years old. With a gap-toothed grin and eyes full of a light he would do anything to protect. She was the reason he'd given up the unpredictability of physical therapy. She was the reason he swallowed his pride and scrubbed floors. For her, he would be a ghost, a nobody, a janitor. A fresh wave of anger washed over him, hot and useless. Not at Aliana Velez, but at himself. He should have kept his head down. He should have ignored it. But how could he? He had seen that flicker of life, that impossible signal in the dark. It was a truth, a real, physical truth. And they had called him a monster for seeing it. Back on the 50th floor, the red ball had been discreetly removed. Julian had a hand on Aliana's shoulder, guiding her back toward her office. "You did the right thing," he said, his voice a comforting balm. "The last thing Naya needs is to be exposed to people like that." Unstable. Aliana sank into the leather chair behind her massive desk, her gaze fixed on her daughter. Naya was quietly stroking her stuffed fox, her expression unreadable. "He said he was a therapist." "A failed one, apparently," Julian said with a dismissive shrug. "Aliana, you have the best pediatric neurologists in the country on Nia's case. They've all said the same thing. The damage is permanent. Don't let some lunatic janitor plant seeds of false hope. It's cruel to you, and it's cruel to her." He was right. Of course he was right. The experts had been clear. The MR the nerve conduction studies. They all told the same heartbreaking story. Irreversible. But as she watched Nia, Aliana couldn't shake the image of the janitor. He hadn't looked unstable. He hadn't looked cruel. His eyes, they hadn't been mocking. They had been focused, searching. It was a look she'd seen before in the eyes of the first responders on the day of the accident. An intense, analytical calm in the middle of chaos. She shook her head, trying to clear the thought. It was just stress. It was the grief, always simmering just beneath the surface. Julian was right. She had to protect her daughter. Nia looked up then, her dark eyes finding her mother's. She didn't speak. She rarely did anymore. Instead, she just lifted her hand and pointed a small finger toward the empty spot on the floor where the red ball had been. Aliana stared at her daughter's outstretched finger. Julian followed her gaze to the empty patch of marble. "She probably just misses the color," he said dismissively, patting Nia's head. "It was a bright ball. We can get you a new one, sweet pea. A better one." He smiled, a placid, reassuring expression that suddenly felt intensely artificial to Aliana. "Yes," Aliana said, her voice distant. "A new one." She pushed down the unsettling feeling, the tiny crack that had formed in the solid wall of her certainty. She spent the rest of the afternoon in a haze, sitting through a virtual board meeting where she presented Q3 projections with her usual flawless precision, while her mind was replaying the scene in the hallway, the janitor's eyes, her daughter's pointing finger. Later that evening, long after Julian had left and the city lights had begun to glitter like a fallen constellation outside her penthouse windows, the feeling returned. Nia was on the thick, cream-colored rug in her playroom, a custom-built space off the main living area, surrounded by soft blocks and picture books. The silence in the apartment was a familiar companion, broken only by the soft hum of the air purifier and the faint rustle of pages as Nia turned them. Aliana knelt beside her, picking up the same stuffed fox Nia had dropped earlier. "Fenton looks tired," she said softly, stroking the toy's worn ear. Nia nodded, not looking up from her book. Aliana's heart hammered against her ribs. She felt a tremor in her hand as she held the fox over the floor, just a few feet from Nia. She let it go. It landed with a soft thud. She watched Nia's legs, hidden beneath the same pink blanket. Nothing, no movement, no reaction. A wave of relief, mingled with a strange, sharp sting of disappointment, washed over her. Julian was right. It was nothing. She was exhausted, seeing ghosts where there were none. She started to stand up, but then she saw it. Nia's toes. Under the edge of the blanket, the toes on her left foot had curled. A quick, tight clench, then a slow release. It was so small, so fleeting, that if she had blinked, she would have missed it. Aliana froze, her breath catching in her throat. She crouched back down, her eyes locked on her daughter's feet. Coincidence. It had to be a coincidence. A random muscle spasm. "Nia, sweetie," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Can you do that again?" Nia looked at her, her expression blank, uncomprehending. She didn't know what that was. Aliana picked up the fox again. This time she dropped it closer, right beside Nia's wheelchair. Thud. Again, the tiny curl of her toes. Undeniable. It was real. The janitor had been right. The apartment suddenly felt cold, cavernous. For years, she had navigated her grief by clinging to the facts, to the diagnoses laid out by the world's most respected specialists. Dr. Aris Thorne himself, the head of pediatric neurology at the city's top hospital, had personally overseen Nia's case. He had sat in this very room, his expression kind but firm, and explained that the nerve pathways were severed beyond repair. He'd prescribed the regimen of medications himself, the small amber bottle of nerve support drops administered twice a day to prevent atrophy and manage phantom pain. She walked to the small refrigerated medical cabinet in the kitchen and took out the bottle. The label was professional, the instructions clear. A pillar of modern medicine holding up the ceiling of her broken world. But the janitor, with his worn-out polo and a $5 rubber ball, had just kicked a crack in its foundation. Ryland's apartment smelled of cinnamon toast and the faint, medicinal scent of Isla's nebulizer. He sat at their small kitchen table, staring at the classifieds on his laptop screen, the words blurring together. Custodial technician, facilities maintenance, sanitation engineer. They were all the same job with a different costume. Each one felt like a door slamming shut. "Did you find one, Daddy?" Isla came and stood beside him, leaning her small chin on his shoulder. Her breathing was even and steady for now, a sound he never took for granted. "Still looking, sweet pea," he said, forcing a cheerful tone and closing the laptop. "How's the homework coming?" "Done," she announced proudly, holding up a drawing. It was a picture of the two of them, holding hands. He was tall and she was small, and they were both smiling under a giant, wobbly sun. He felt a familiar ache in his chest, a mix of fierce love and crushing inadequacy. "It's a masterpiece," he said, his voice thick. "We should frame this one." "We're running out of wall," she giggled. He looked around their tiny living space, where her drawings were taped over every available surface, a colorful defense against the peeling paint and water-stained ceilings. She was right. He was failing her. He had to find something, and fast. The rent was due next week, and her inhaler prescription needed a refill. "Don't worry," he said, pulling her into a hug and kissing the top of her head. "Daddy will figure it out. I always do." She hugged him back tightly. "I know." He held onto her, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, trying to absorb her unwavering faith in him. It was a faith he felt less and less deserving of with each passing day. He thought of Nia Velez, a little girl trapped in a prison of silence, and her mother, a woman trapped in a fortress of certainty. He had tried to offer a key and had been thrown out for his trouble. Maybe Julian was right. Maybe he was just a failed therapist, a janitor who should learn to keep his eyes on the floor. Aliana couldn't sleep. The image of Nia's curling toes was burned into her mind. At 2 a.m., she found herself in her home office, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She wasn't looking at financial reports. She was typing Ryland Cole, physical therapist, into a search engine. There wasn't much. A few outdated professional listings, a mention in a local news article about a search and rescue volunteer team he'd once been a part of. But then she found it. A link to a small private practice he had run years ago, now defunct. The About Us page had a picture. He looked younger, his face less worn, but the eyes were the same. Calm, focused, analytical. She clicked on a link to a blog he had written. There was only one post, dated 3 years ago, the day before the website went dark. The title was On Listening to the Whispers. "The body can tell 1,000 stories if we are quiet enough to listen," he had written. Sometimes, the most profound signals are the ones everyone else has been trained to ignore. The flicker of a muscle, the hesitation in a breath, the phantom pain that isn't phantom at all. These are the whispers of a body trying to heal itself. Our job is not to shout over them with diagnoses and predictions. Our job is to listen. Aliana read the words again, and then a third time. She looked from the screen to the city beyond her window. A storm of doubt and a terrifying, fragile tendril of hope were warring inside her. The experts, the specialists, the men with degrees and reputations had all been shouting. And a janitor, a ghost in her hallways, had been listening. She closed the laptop, a decision solidifying in her heart. It was insane. It was reckless. It defied all logic and every piece of medical advice she had paid a fortune for. But she had to know. She picked up her phone, her thumb hovering over the icon for her head of security. She knew his name. She had his file. Finding him wouldn't be hard. The hard part would be what came next. The fluorescent lights of the temp agency waiting room hummed with a soul-crushing monotony. Ryland sat on a hard plastic chair, a clipboard with a generic application resting on his knee. He'd been there for an hour, watching other desperate faces get called in and sent back out with the same defeated slump in their shoulders. He was just another number in a sea of them. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A blocked number, probably another collection agency for his late wife's medical bills. He almost ignored it, but a nagging impulse made him answer. "Hello? Is this Ryland Cole?" The voice was male, professional, and had the flat, no-nonsense tone of law enforcement or high-end security. "Who's asking?" Ryland said, his guard instantly up. "My name is Arthur Vance. I'm the head of security for Velez Financial. Ms. Velez would like to request a meeting with you." Ryland's blood ran cold. A meeting? It sounded more like a summons. He imagined lawyers, cease and desist orders, threats. "I was fired." "We have nothing to talk about." "Ms. Velez insists," the voice said, unmoved. "She believes it would be in your best interest. The coffee shop on the corner of Elm and 6th, 1 hour, she will be alone." The line went dead. Ryland stared at his phone, his heart pounding. This was a bad idea. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to disappear, to protect Isla from whatever this was. But the part of him that was a therapist, the part that had seen the flicker of hope in Nia's leg, couldn't walk away. And the part that was a broke, single father knew he didn't have many other options. The coffee shop was quiet, smelling of roasted beans and rain-dampened coats. Ryland chose a small table in the back corner, a place with a clear view of the door. He ordered a black coffee he couldn't afford and waited. She arrived exactly on time. She wasn't the CEO from the 50th floor. That woman wore power like a tailored suit. This woman wore a simple gray trench coat, her dark hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. There were no assistants, no bodyguards, just the faint, purple smudges of sleeplessness under her eyes. She looked like a mother. Aliana saw him and walked over, her movements hesitant. She sat down opposite him, placing her hands on the table. They were trembling slightly. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Cole," she began, her voice low. "I didn't have much of a choice, did I?" he replied, his tone clipped. "Is this where you threatened to sue me?" Her eyes widened, and for the first time, he saw something other than anger in them. Guilt. "No," she said quickly. "God, no. This is the opposite of that." She took a deep breath. "I came to apologize and to ask for your help." Ryland stared at her, saying nothing. "You were right," she whispered, the words sounding like they were being torn from her. "About Nia. I saw it myself last night. Her toes, they curled. It was just for a second, but it was real." The anger in Ryland's chest deflated, replaced by a sudden, sharp pang of empathy. He saw the terror and the desperate hope warring in her face. He'd seen that look on hundreds of parents' faces in his old life.
"I fired you,"
she continued, her voice cracking.
"I called you a monster."
I was wrong. I was afraid. And I let my pride and Julian's advice get in the way of seeing what was right in front of me. "Your brother seems very protective," Ryland said, testing the waters. A shadow passed over her face. "Julian means well. He's concerned about Naya's stability." The words sounded rehearsed, hollow. She leaned forward, her eyes pleading. "I want to hire you back. Not as a janitor. I don't know what to call it. A companion for Nia, an observer. I need you to tell me what you see. I need you to help me understand what's real." Ryland thought of Isla, of the rent, of the empty space in their kitchen cupboards. The money would change everything, but this was dangerous. He would be walking into a minefield of family politics and corporate power. "Why me?" he asked quietly. "You can afford the best doctors in the world." "I have the best doctors," she said, a new bitterness in her voice. "And they've all told me she'll never walk again. They look at her chart, at her scans. They don't look at her. You did. You listened to the whispers." She had read his blog. The realization sent a strange jolt through him. "This has to be completely off the books," she went on, her voice regaining its command. "No one can know why you're really there?" "Especially not Julian or the medical staff. To them, you'll be a child enrichment specialist, or some other corporate nonsense title. You'll have a new badge, full access. I'll pay you triple your janitorial salary." It was a lifeline. It was a noose. "I have a daughter," Ryland said, his voice firm. "Isla. She's my priority. Her school schedule, her asthma treatments, nothing gets in the way of that. My hours have to be flexible." Aliana nodded without hesitation. "Of course. Anything you need. And I want access," he added. "Full access to Nia's medical records. Every file, every prescription, every doctor's note since the day of the accident." She stiffened slightly. "That's highly confidential." "Then I can't help you," he said, preparing to stand. "If you want me to see what the doctors missed, I need to see what they saw first." They stared at each other across the small table. Two parents from different universes, bound by a single, impossible hope. Finally, Aliana gave a slow, deliberate nod. "All right." She slid a thin black envelope across the table. "This is a burner phone. It's the only way we'll communicate. Your new badge and a keycard are inside. Your salary will be deposited weekly into an account I've set up for you. Instructions are in the envelope." He picked it up. It felt impossibly heavy. "Start tomorrow," she said, standing up. "Just be discreet, please." She turned and walked out of the coffee shop, melting back into the city, leaving Rylan alone with a black coffee, a secret, and the key to the 50th floor. He looked out the window at the rain starting to fall, his reflection a pale, uncertain ghost in the glass. He had his job back and more, but he had the chilling feeling that he hadn't just been hired to help a little girl walk. He'd been hired to walk into a war. Walking back through the glass doors of Velez Financial felt like stepping into a parallel universe. Yesterday, he had been invisible, a man in a gray polo whose job was to erase scuff marks. Today, he wore a simple dark blue button-down shirt and clean slacks he'd bought from a second-hand store that morning. His new badge read, Ryland Cole, Child Development Associate. It felt like a lie and a target at the same time. He took the main elevator this time, not the service one. A few executives in sharp suits gave him a polite, indifferent nod. They saw the badge, not the man. He was no longer a janitor. He was just another cog, and therefore, still invisible in a different way. When the doors opened on the 50th floor, the first person he saw was Julian. Aliana's stepbrother was leaning against the reception desk, laughing with one of the assistants. The laughter died the moment he saw Rylan. His smile didn't just fade, it was surgically removed. "You," Julian said, his voice a low hum of disbelief. He pushed himself off the desk and strode toward Rylan, his polished shoes silent on the marble. "What are you doing here?" "I thought my sister had you removed." Rylan's heart hammered, but he kept his face neutral, his posture relaxed. He held up his badge. "Ms. Velez and I had a misunderstanding. She's given me a new position." Julian's eyes narrowed, scanning the badge. "Child Development Associate?" "What does that even mean?" "It means I'll be working with Nia," Rylan said calmly. "Arts, crafts, educational games, keeping her stimulated while her mother is in meetings." Julian stared at him for a long, unnerving moment, searching for a crack in the story. "My sister is a compassionate woman," he said finally, his voice slick with condescension. "Clearly, she felt guilty about firing a man in your position, but make no mistake, Cole, I'll be watching you. My niece's well-being is my primary concern." "Mine too," Rylan said, meeting his gaze without flinching. He walked past Julian, the man's cold stare boring into his back. The war had officially begun, and he hadn't even seen the girl yet. He found Naya in her playroom, a bright, airy space with floor-to-ceiling windows. A woman in nurse's scrubs was with her, a private duty nurse named Agnes. She was older, with a stern face and an air of professional detachment. She looked up as Rylan entered, her expression wary. "You must be the new associate," she said, her tone implying she'd seen a dozen like him come and go. "I'm Agnes. I handle Nia's medical needs. Her medication schedule is on the chart by the door. Do not deviate from it." "Understood," Rylan said, his eyes finding Nia. She was in her wheelchair by the window, sketching in a large notepad with a charcoal pencil. She didn't look up. "She doesn't talk much," Agnes continued, packing her bag. "And she startles easily. Keep your voice down. My shift is over. Her mother will be back in 2 hours." She left without another word. The room fell silent. Rylan didn't move closer. He just stood there, letting Nia get used to his presence. He wasn't a therapist today. He was just a guy in a room. He pulled a small, smooth piece of basswood from his pocket, along with a small whittling knife. He sat on the floor, a good 10 feet away from her, and began to carve. He didn't make a big show of it. He just worked, the knife making soft, rhythmic scraping sounds as thin curls of wood fell to the floor around him. He'd been a woodcarver his whole life, a skill his father had taught him. It was how he centered himself, how he found the story inside the grain. Minutes stretched into a half hour. He was carving a small, simple bird, letting the shape emerge from the wood. Finally, he heard a sound, the soft whir of wheels. Nia had turned her chair and was watching him, her charcoal pencil forgotten, her eyes wide with a quiet, intense curiosity. He didn't look up, but he spoke, his voice soft. "My daughter, Isla, likes birds. She says they know the best secrets because they get to listen from way up high." Nia said nothing, but she rolled her chair a few inches closer. He kept carving, feeling her attention on him. This was the first step. Not diagnosis, not treatment. Just connection. Listening. That evening, a courier delivered a heavy, locked briefcase to his apartment. Rylan called the burner phone. Aliana answered on the first ring. "You have it?" she asked, her voice tense. "I do." "The combination. Nia's birthday. 0-8-1-4. She paused. "How was it?" "With her?" "Quiet," he said. "We didn't do much. But she watched me. That's a start." He could hear the relief in her sigh. "Julian is furious," she said. "He thinks I'm being reckless, emotional. He says I'm putting Nia at risk." "He's the one putting her at risk if he's telling you to ignore what you saw with your own eyes," Rylan said firmly. There was a silence on the line. "The files are all there," she said finally. "Find something, Rylan. Please." After he got Isla to bed, Rylan sat at his kitchen table and opened the briefcase. It was filled with thick binders, each one meticulously labeled. MRIs, EEG reports, consultation notes, and a thick file labeled pharmacology. It was a paper monument to a hopeless diagnosis. He started there with the drugs. He flipped through the pages, his old training kicking in. He saw the standard prescriptions for a patient with severe nerve damage. But then he found the one that stood out, the nerve support drops, prescribed by Dr. Eris Thorne. The chemical name was listed, cyclobenzaprine hydrochloride. Rylan froze. Cyclobenzaprine wasn't a nerve support supplement. It was a powerful, centrally acting muscle relaxant. It was used to treat acute, painful musculoskeletal conditions, spasms, short-term. He scanned the prescription history. Dr. Thorne had prescribed it for Nia 2 weeks after her accident, and it had been refilled consistently, twice a day, every day, for 3 years. A cold dread washed over him. Giving a child a potent muscle relaxant for that long, it wouldn't just manage spasms. It would suppress motor nerve impulses. It would mimic the symptoms of paralysis. It would numb the very whispers her body was trying to send. Her recovery wasn't being missed. It was being actively, chemically, blocked. He looked up from the file, his gaze landing on Isla's drawing on the wall. The smiling father, the smiling daughter. A simple, happy world. He looked back at the cold, clinical text on the page. Someone was poisoning Nia Velez, drop by drop, in plain sight. And they were calling it medicine. Rylan's hand was shaking as he dialed the burner phone. He stared at the chemical name on the page, the letters seeming to vibrate with a sinister energy. Cyclobenzaprine hydrochloride. It wasn't a treatment. It was a chemical cage. Aliana answered instantly, her voice a tense whisper. "What is it? Did you find something?" "I did," Rylan said, his own voice low and urgent. He stood up and began to pace the small confines of his kitchen, the floorboards creaking under his feet. "Aliana, the drops. The nerve support drops Dr. Thorne prescribed. What about them? They're supposed to help with muscle atrophy." "No," Rylan said, the word coming out sharp, flat. "That's not what they do. That's not what they are." He took a breath, forcing himself to be calm, to be clinical. The active ingredient is a drug called cyclobenzaprine. It's a powerful, fast-acting muscle relaxant. It's used for severe spasms, short-term. It essentially tells the central nervous system to stop sending motor signals to the muscles. Silence. On the other end of the line, he could hear nothing but the faint, hollow sound of her breathing. "Aliana, are you there?" "I don't understand," she finally said, her voice small, fragile. "A muscle relaxant. They're not supporting her nerves, they're sedating them," he explained, the pieces clicking together with sickening clarity. "They're suppressing her body's ability to respond. The dose she's on, twice a day for 3 years. It would absolutely mimic the symptoms of paralysis in a child. It would numb any signals the nerves are trying to send. She's not paralyzed, Aliana. I think she's being chemically restrained." A choked, horrified sound came through the phone. "No, that can't be. Dr. Thorne, he's the best. Julian vetted him himself. He wouldn't—" "Someone would," Rylan countered, his voice hard. "Someone is. This isn't malpractice. This is deliberate. I'm going to kill him," she hissed, her voice transforming from shock to a cold, razor-edged fury. "I'm calling Thorne. I'm calling the police. I'll have his license, his house, everything." "No!" Rylan cut her off, his voice rising with an urgency that surprised them both. "You can't. If you do that, you'll show your hand. They'll deny everything. They'll say it was a clerical error, a pharmacy mix-up. They'll destroy the evidence, and Julian will paint you as an unstable, grieving mother having a breakdown. They'll take Nia away from you, Aliana. They'll put her somewhere you can't reach her, and they will never, ever let you find out the truth." He let the terrible reality of his words sink in. He heard her take a ragged breath, the fight seeming to drain out of her, replaced by a chilling fear. "Then what do we do?" she whispered. "What can we do?" "We can't just let them keep poisoning her. We need proof." Rylan said, his mind racing. Undeniable proof, and there's only one way to get it. He hesitated, the danger of what he was about to suggest settling heavily in the room. We have to take her off the drug. Secretly. How? Nurse Agnes gives her the drops every morning and every evening. She logs it. If I tell her to stop, she'll report it to Thorne immediately. You don't tell her to stop, Rylan said. We switch the bottle. We replace the medication with a placebo. Saline solution, distilled water, something harmless. We get an identical bottle, switch the labels. No one will know but us. Then we watch. If I'm right. If the drug is what's holding her back, we'll start to see changes. Small at first, but real. It was a wild, desperate gamble. It was also their only move. Okay, Aliana said, her voice suddenly firm, resolute. The CEO is back. I can get a bottle. The pharmacy that supplies us is a subsidiary of a Velez-owned company. I can have a sterile, identical empty bottle delivered to me tomorrow morning. No questions asked. I'll use distilled water. You have to be careful, Rylan warned. Agnes, Julian, they can't see you do it. The best time would be after Agnes leaves for the day and before she comes back in the morning. I'll handle it, she said. Just tell me what to look for, Rylan. If this works, what will happen? More reflexes, maybe, he said, trying to manage her expectations. More muscle tone. Maybe she'll be more alert, more energetic. It's been 3 years. Her body has to learn how to wake up again. The most important thing is we watch and we wait, and we act like nothing has changed. The next day, Rylan felt the weight of their secret in every step he took. He walked into the playroom with a smile on his face, a new block of wood in his hands, and the gut-wrenching knowledge that the girl in the wheelchair was being systematically poisoned by the people who were supposed to be protecting her. Julian was there, lingering by the door, his arms crossed. Morning, Cole, he said, his eyes cold. Keeping my niece stimulated, are we? That's the plan, Rylan said, keeping his tone light. He sat down in his usual spot and started carving, the familiar motion a small anchor in a sea of tension. Naya watched him, a silent observer. Today, he was carving a fox. As the shape began to emerge, she rolled her chair closer than she ever had before, her eyes fixed on his hands. He felt a surge of hope so fierce, it almost buckled him. Just hold on, kid, he thought. Help is coming. He worked for an hour, the silence comfortable, companionable. Then, the door opened, and Nurse Agnes bustled in, carrying a small tray. On it was a tiny paper cup with water in the familiar amber bottle. Medication time, Naya, she said in a brisk, cheerful voice that didn't reach her eyes. Rylan's hands froze. He watched as Agnes administered 2 drops under Nia's tongue. Nia didn't flinch, didn't react. She was used to it. The nurse made a note on the chart, and just like that, another dose of the poison slipped into her system. Rylan felt a wave of impotent fury. He wanted to leap up, to snatch the bottle from her hands, to scream the truth. But he forced himself to stay still, to keep carving, to smile. He had to play his part. That night, the penthouse was dark. Aliana stood in the kitchen, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. In her hand was the new bottle, filled with distilled water. The label she had painstakingly steamed off the old bottle and reapplied was perfectly aligned. It was an identical twin. She crept to the refrigerated medical cabinet. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the handle. She opened the door. The amber bottle of cyclobenzaprine sat there, cold and clinical. A promise of care. A vessel of poison. She took a shaky breath. She picked up the real bottle, its weight feeling immense in her palm. For a moment, she just held it, staring at the name of the man who had prescribed it, the man she had trusted with her daughter's life. Dr. Eris Thorne. Then, with a final, resolute movement, she put the placebo in its place and pushed it to the back, exactly where the other one had been. She slipped the real bottle into her pocket. The switch was made. She closed the cabinet door. The soft click echoed in the silent apartment like a gunshot. There was no going back now. They had declared a silent war, and the battlefield was her own daughter. The first day of the placebo felt like holding a live wire. Every nerve in Ryland's body was screaming with tension, but on the surface, he had to be a sea of calm. He walked into the playroom, nodding a polite "good morning" to Nurse Agnes, his gaze immediately finding Nia. She was by the window, as usual, looking out at the city. But something was different. Her posture. It was subtle, but her head wasn't bowed quite as low. Her shoulders seemed less slumped. Or maybe he was just imagining it, projecting his own desperate hope onto her. He sat down and began to carve, his knife making the only sound in the room. He was working on a squirrel, its tail a flourish of delicate curves. He didn't speak to Nia. He just let his presence be a quiet, steady thing. At precisely 9:15 a.m., Nurse Agnes came in with the tray. She held the amber bottle, the fake amber bottle, and administered the distilled water drops under Nia's tongue. Ryland's heart felt like it was trying to beat its way out of his chest. He didn't dare look up from his carving, but he watched from the corner of his eye. Agnes made her note. Nia blinked. Nothing happened. The lie held. Agnes left, and the quiet returned. For the next hour, Ryland worked, and Nia watched. Then he tried his first tiny test. He let a small curled shaving of wood fall from his lap onto the floor, about a foot from her wheelchair. It was weightless, silent. It wasn't a stimulus. It was just an object in her peripheral vision. Her eyes flickered down to it. A normal reaction, perhaps. But then they stayed there for a beat too long, as if her brain was processing the shape, the texture, in a way it hadn't before. Later, he hummed a little tune, a simple melody from one of Aisla's cartoons. It was a tune he often hummed without thinking. From the wheelchair, a tiny, breathy sound answered him. Not the tune, but a single, soft note. A hum. It was the first sound he had ever heard her make. He didn't react, didn't look up. He just kept carving, but a grin spread across his face that he couldn't contain. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Aliana. Anything? He quickly typed back under the cover of his carving block. She's more alert. And she hummed. Stay the course. The door swung open, and Julian walked in. A condescending smile fixed on his face. Well, well, the wood carver. Is this what my sister is paying you for? To make a mess on her Persian rug? Nia seems to enjoy it, Ryland said, his voice even. Julian's gaze shifted to Nia. He watched her for a moment, his smile tightening. She seems agitated today, restless. Are you sure you're not overstimulating her, Cole? She's just been watching me, Ryland said. Julian walked over to Nia's chair and placed a hand on her shoulder. Everything all right, sweetie? This man isn't bothering you, is he? Nia didn't answer, but she flinched slightly at his touch, leaning away. Julian didn't seem to notice, or if he did, he ignored it. He was too busy staring Ryland down, establishing his dominance. Just remember your place, Julian said, his voice a low threat. You're here for her amusement. Nothing more. He turned and left, the scent of expensive cologne lingering in his wake. Ryland let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He looked at Nia. She was watching the door where her uncle had disappeared, her small face clouded with an emotion he couldn't quite read. Fear? Annoyance? He decided to push a little harder. He finished the squirrel, sanded it smooth with a small piece of sandpaper and held it out. For you, he said softly, to keep the fox company. She hesitated. Then slowly she rolled her chair forward and reached out. Her small, pale fingers wrapped around the warm wood. She studied it, turning it over and over. Her thumb traced the curve of its bushy tail, and then he saw it. As her thumb pressed into the wood, the toes on her right foot curled, a brief, spasmodic clench. It was there and gone in a second. But it was real. It was a signal. The connection was still there, fighting to be heard. That evening, Rylan relayed everything to Aliana over the phone, his voice buzzing with a new, dangerous energy. The reflexes are there, Aliana. They're buried, but they're there. The drug was suppressing them completely. Her body is starting to wake up. In her silent 50th floor office, Aliana pressed a hand to her mouth, tears blurring the city lights into a galaxy of broken stars. What does this mean? What happens next? We keep going, he said. We have to be patient. We give her body time to flush the poison out. We keep encouraging movement, response. We give her a reason to want to connect. He could hear the hope and the terror in her breath. Julian said she seemed agitated. He's seeing what he wants to see, Rylan said firmly. He's not seeing a girl waking up. He's seeing his control slipping. It means we're doing something right. Later that night, Aliana went into Naya's room to check on her before she went to bed. Naya was already asleep, the wooden squirrel clutched in her hand, resting on her chest. Aliana smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached her tired eyes. She gently pulled the soft cashmere blanket up over her daughter. As the blanket brushed against Nia's feet, her right leg suddenly kicked out. Not a twitch, not a spasm. A kick. It was strong enough to push the heavy blanket halfway off the bed. Aliana froze, her hand hovering in the air. Her heart stopped. She stared at her daughter's leg, now resting outside the blanket, perfectly still again. It wasn't a flicker anymore. It was a shout. The prisoner was rattling the bars of her cage, and for the first time in 3 years, Aliana Velez believed, with every fiber of her being, that a jailbreak was possible. The morning air on the 50th floor was different. It tasted of electricity. Aliana was waiting for Rylan by the elevators, her usual mask of cool command replaced by a raw, nervous energy that radiated from her in the waves. Her eyes were bright, sleepless. "She kicked," she said the moment he stepped out, her voice a low, fierce whisper. "Last night, in her sleep." She kicked the blanket clean off. It wasn't a twitch, Rylan. It was a full extension. Rylan's professional calm momentarily deserted him. A wide, incredulous grin broke across his face. That's incredible. It means the neural pathways are firing. They're trying to reconnect. The signal is getting stronger. What do we do now? Aliana asked, gripping the strap of her briefcase, her knuckles white. Do we push harder? We don't push, he said, his focus returning. We invite. Her brain has been asleep for 3 years. We have to give it a reason to want to wake up. He held up a canvas tote bag he was carrying. I brought some new games today. Bigger ones. Her eyes darted down the hallway, toward Julian's office. He's been watching the security feeds. I checked the logs. He's been monitoring the playroom. Let him watch, Rylan said, his jaw set. Let him watch her get better. When Rylan entered the playroom, Naya was already waiting, her eyes tracking the door. There was an anticipation in her gaze he hadn't seen before. He smiled. Morning, Nia. I brought something new today. I'm getting a little tired of carving. He pulled out a set of large, brightly colored foam building blocks. They were big and lightweight, designed for toddlers to stack and knock over. He sat on the floor and started building a simple tower, deliberately clumsy, letting blocks tumble from his hands. Oops, he said, as a big red block rolled away from him, stopping just by the wheel of her chair. She watched it, then looked at him. He didn't ask her to get it. He just started building again, now with one less red block. A few minutes later, he accidentally dropped a blue one. It rolled to her other side, just out of her immediate reach. He was creating a field of gentle obstacles around her. He wasn't asking her to move. He was just making the space around her more interesting. He kept building, his tower growing taller, wobblier. He hummed his little cartoon tune. After a moment, he heard her soft hum join his. Then he reached for a long yellow block, the keystone for his tower. As he placed it on top, he nudged the whole structure. It swayed dramatically and then came crashing down, the foam blocks scattering silently across the rug. One of the long yellow blocks landed directly across her feet. He sighed dramatically. Oh man, total collapse. He started gathering the blocks, leaving the one on her feet for last. He picked up all the others, piling them beside him. Finally, he looked at the yellow block resting on her legs. Can you help me with that last one? He asked softly. It was the first time he had directly asked for her physical help. She looked down at the block, then at her legs, as if seeing them for the first time. Her brow furrowed in concentration. She reached down with her hands, but the angle was awkward. She couldn't get a good grip. She grunted, a small sound of frustration. It's okay if you can't, Ryland said gently, not wanting to pressure her. She shook her head, a fierce, determined look in her eyes. She leaned forward again, her hands straining. And then it happened. Her left leg lifted. It was slow, shaky, and only rose an inch off the footrest. The foam block wobbled and then slid to the floor. Her leg dropped back down with a soft thud. Ryland stared, his breath caught in his throat. It wasn't a kick, it wasn't a reflex. It was a conscious, deliberate, goal-oriented movement. Her brain had sent a command, and her leg had obeyed. Naya looked at her own leg, her eyes wider than he had ever seen them. Awe and confusion warred on her face. She looked at Ryland, her mouth slightly open. Before he could say anything, the door opened. Julian stood there, his face a thundercloud. He had clearly been watching on a monitor. What is going on in here? He demanded, his eyes darting from Ryland to Naya, to the scattered blocks. I heard a noise. Just building a tower, Ryland said, his voice miraculously steady. He forced himself to start gathering the last few blocks, his heart pounding a wild rhythm against his ribs. He had to hide the breakthrough. Julian couldn't know. Not yet. She seems flushed, Julian said, striding over to Nia and placing a hand on her forehead. Are you all right, Naya? Has he been tiring you out? Nia pulled away from his touch, shaking her head. And then she did something else that stunned Ryland to his core. She spoke. Her voice was raspy from disuse, barely a whisper, but the word was perfectly clear. No. Julian froze. He stared down at his niece as if she'd grown a second head. He had been so focused on Ryland, he hadn't been prepared for a response from her. What did you say? He stammered. Naya looked him straight in the eye and said it again, a little louder this time. No. Julian took a step back, his composure completely shattered. He looked from Naya's defiant face to Ryland's carefully neutral one. The suspicion in his eyes curdled into something colder, harder, certainty. He knew, without a doubt, that something was terribly wrong. Without another word, he turned on his heel and walked out, pulling his phone from his pocket as he went. Ryland met Nia's gaze. She looked back at him, a tiny, triumphant smile playing on her lips. They had won the battle. But Ryland knew, with a chilling certainty, that Julian had just left to start the war. Down the hall, Julian stepped into an empty office, his back to the glass wall. He jabbed a number on his phone. Thorne, he snapped when the call was answered. It's Julian. We have a problem, a serious one. He paused, listening. No, it's not the mother. It's the girl. She's changing. She just spoke. Another pause. Yes, I'm sure, he hissed, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. And I know who's responsible. It's the janitor. The war began not with a shout, but with a sterile, venomous quiet. The next morning, Julian was waiting for Aliana outside her office, his posture rigid, his face a mask of controlled fury. Dr. Thorne stood beside him, holding a tablet, his expression a careful blend of professional concern and grave disappointment. We need to talk about your daughter, Julian said, his voice leaving no room for argument. He didn't wait for a reply, simply walked into her office as if it were his own. Aliana followed, her heart a cold stone in her chest. "I took the liberty of having Dr. Thorne review the playroom security footage from yesterday," Julian began, gesturing for the doctor to step forward. Thorne cleared his throat. "Ms. Velez," he said, his tone oozing false sympathy, "I am deeply concerned. The activities Mr. Cole is engaging in are reckless. He is encouraging movements her damaged nerves simply cannot support. This morning, Naya is reporting significant muscle fatigue and soreness. He is pushing her body past its limits. He is causing her pain." Aliana stared at him, her face a blank wall of ice. "She lifted her leg yesterday, doctor," she spoke. "Forgive me if I don't see that as a failure." "A spasm, Aliana," Julian snapped. "A neurological misfire brought on by dangerous overstimulation. Thorne is the expert, not some janitor with a messiah complex. Mr. Cole's methods are unorthodox and, frankly, dangerous," Thorne added smoothly. "If this continues, I fear he could cause permanent damage, undoing the years of careful management we've established." It was a perfectly rehearsed performance. They were building their narrative, laying the foundation for the trap. "He is to have no further contact with Nia," Julian declared. "Effective immediately. We'll find her a new companion, a licensed one." Aliana walked around her desk and sat down, her movements slow and deliberate. She looked from her stepbrother's smug face to the doctor's false one. "No," she said, her voice quiet but absolute. "Rylan stays." Julian's jaw dropped. "Have you lost your mind?" After what the doctor just said. "I have seen more progress in the last week with him than I have in the last 3 years with you," she said, her gaze locking onto Thorne. "So, you will excuse me if I choose to trust the results I can see with my own eyes." Julian's face purpled with rage. "You are putting her at risk because of some fantasy. This is what I was afraid of. Your judgment is compromised. If you will not protect your daughter, Aliana, I will. I will call an emergency board meeting. I will show them the footage. I will bring in Thorne as an expert witness. I will have you removed from this company on the grounds of negligence." The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Her position, her company, her daughter. He was coming for all of it. "Get out of my office," she said, her voice trembling with a fury that matched his. "Both of you." The moment they were gone, she was on the burner phone to Rylan. "They're making their move," she said, her voice frantic. "They're trying to build a case that you're hurting her. They're going to use it to take everything." "I know," Rylan said, his voice grim. He was in his apartment, the original amber bottle, the one filled with the real poison, sitting on the table in front of him. "It means we're out of time. I have to get this to a lab. Today." "How?" "They're watching me. They're watching you. We can't risk being seen together." "There's a courier service," he said, his mind working fast. "One I used to use for medical samples. It's discreet. I'll send it to a friend, a biochemist I trust. But I need something from you. I need you to create a distraction. Something big enough to get Julian and Thorne out of the building for a few hours." "Leave that to me," Aliana said, a new, steely resolve in her voice. An hour later, a fire alarm blared through the top floors of Velez Financial. It wasn't a real fire. It was a server malfunction in the main data hub. A carefully orchestrated bit of chaos Aliana had triggered with her C-level clearance. As executives and staff streamed towards the emergency exits, Julian and Thorne were forced to evacuate with them. In the confusion, Rylan, dressed in his janitorial uniform, slipped out a service exit. He walked 6 blocks to a nondescript drop box, placed the carefully padded envelope inside, and sent a text. The package was on its way. The truth was in motion, but their enemies were moving faster. That afternoon, Julian approached Nurse Agnes, his face a mask of deep concern. "Agnes, I'm worried about Aliana," he said, his voice low and conspiratorial. "She's not herself. She's become fixated on this janitor. I saw him with Nia's medication this morning. He was just looking at it. It made me uneasy. Would you do me a favor? A confidential one. Bring me the bottle. I want to have its composition verified just to be sure." The nurse, loyal and easily manipulated, saw only a concerned uncle. "Of course, Mr. Velez." "Right away." She retrieved the placebo bottle from the medical cabinet. Julian took it, his fingers closing around the glass. "Thank you, Agnes. You're doing the right thing for Nia." He went straight to Dr. Thorne's office. Thorne had a new bottle waiting. It looked identical, but this one contained a double dose of the cyclobenzaprine. "This will create a significant sedative effect," Thorne said clinically. "It will cause lethargy, muscle weakness, perhaps even disorientation. When we find her in that state, we will have our proof that Cole's therapy has caused a severe neurological regression." Julian smiled, a cold, predatory gleam in his eyes. He swapped the bottles. The trap was now baited. Late that afternoon, Rylan was in the playroom. Nia was holding onto the edge of a low, sturdy coffee table, her knuckles white. Her legs were trembling violently, but she was supporting her own weight. For the first time in 3 years, she was standing. A breathless, triumphant laugh escaped Rylan's lips. "You're doing it, Nia. You're doing it." She looked over at him, her face shining with a mixture of terror and ecstatic pride. "I'm tall," she whispered. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated miracle. And then the door opened. Nurse Agnes came in, carrying the tray for the evening medication. She smiled. "My goodness, Nia, look at you." She administered the 2 drops from the new, double-strength bottle. Rylan's heart soared. He didn't know about the switch. He saw only victory. For a few minutes, nothing happened. Nia remained standing, growing more confident by the second. Then, her face went pale. A look of confusion clouded her eyes. "I'm dizzy," she slurred. Her legs buckled. She didn't fall. Rylan caught her, sweeping her up into his arms, his mind reeling. "Nia, what is it? What's wrong?" Her body went limp against his. Her eyes fluttered, unfocused. She let out a small, terrified whimper. The strength, the light, the miracle. It was all draining away, like water through cupped hands. The door burst open. Julian stormed in, Dr. Thorne right behind him. "Get away from her!" Julian roared, pointing a trembling finger at Rylan. "What have you done to her?" Thorne rushed forward, grabbing Nia's wrist, his face a picture of theatrical alarm. "Her pulse is thready. Her muscles are completely flaccid. My God, it's a full neurological collapse. He's caused a toxic shock to her system." Just then, Aliana ran in, drawn by the commotion. She stopped dead in the doorway, her eyes taking in the scene. Her daughter, limp and crying in the janitor's arms. Her stepbrother and her doctor, faces alight with accusation. It was a perfectly staged nightmare. "Aliana, thank God!" Julian cried, rushing to her side. "I warned you. I told you he would hurt her. Look at what he's done." Aliana stared, her world tilting on its axis. Her mind screamed that it was a lie, a trap. But her eyes saw the undeniable truth. Her daughter, who had been standing moments before, was now broken again. And Rylan was at the center of it, Aliana's world fractured into a million sharp-edged pieces. On one side was the impossible miracle, her daughter standing. On the other was the horrifying reality, her daughter limp in a janitor's arms. Her mind screamed trap, but her heart stuttered at the visual evidence. "He did this," Julian hissed, stepping closer to her, his voice a venomous whisper in her ear. "The man you trusted. He pushed her too far, and now, look. All that progress gone, maybe forever." Rylan ignored him. He held Nia close, his mind racing, piecing it together. The suddenness of it, the timing. It wasn't a natural regression, it wasn't fatigue. This was chemical, it had to be. "It was the medication," Rylan said, his voice low and urgent, his eyes locking on Aliana's. He had to make her see. She was fine. She was standing, And then the nurse gave her the drops, and 2 minutes later, this. Eliana, it was the drops.
Lies,
Thorne boomed, stepping forward.
he's trying to deflect blame. A neurological event of this magnitude is not caused by a simple vitamin supplement. Security!
He bellowed toward the door.
Get security up here now!
Aliana's gaze was fixed on her daughter's pale, listless face. Naya whimpered, her eyes fluttering. "Mama," she whispered, her voice weak and slurred.
Sleepy?
That one word cut through the chaos. Aliana's focus snapped back to Rylan, not with accusation, but with dawning, icy horror. "Rylan," she said, her voice barely audible. "The bottle the nurse used. Is it the same one from this morning?"
It has to be.
Rylan started, but then he looked toward the medical cart. He saw the amber bottle, sitting there, looking exactly like the placebo. But it couldn't be. "I'll have him arrested for assault," Julian shouted as 2 uniformed security guards appeared in the doorway.
For what he's done to this child.
The guards stepped forward, their expressions grim. "Sir, we're going to have to ask you to hand the child to her mother and come with us." Rylan held Naya tighter, his mind a whirlwind. He was losing. They had outmaneuvered him completely. He had no proof, no time, nothing but his word against a doctor's. And then, a vibration, a low, insistent buzz from the burner phone in his pocket. It was a lifeline. It was the only chance he had. "Wait," Rylan said, his voice cutting through the noise. He shifted Naya's weight with one arm, fumbling for the phone with the other.
"He's calling his lawyer."
Julian scoffed.
"It's too late for that, Cole."
Rylan ignored him. He saw the caller ID, Marco Labs. He answered it, his thumb jabbing the speakerphone icon.
"Rylan?"
A man's voice, tinny and urgent, filled the tense silence of the room. "Marco here, I got your sample. Man, what the hell is this stuff? You said it was for a kid?" Everyone froze. Julian's triumphant expression faltered. Dr. Thorne's face went white. "Go on, Marco," Rylan said, his eyes never leaving Aliana's.
"This isn't a vitamin. It's not a nerve treatment,"
the voice from the phone announced, clear and clinical. "It's a massive dose of cyclobenzaprine, a powerful skeletal muscle relaxant. We're talking prescription strength, heavily concentrated. Given daily, it would absolutely cause motor function suppression, muscle atrophy. It would mimic the symptoms of paralysis. Rylan, whoever gave this to a child, was poisoning them." Silence, thick, absolute, and damning. The truth, raw and undeniable, hung in the air. Julian looked like he'd been punched in the gut. Dr. Thorne took an involuntary step backward, his eyes wide with panic. Aliana's face crumpled, not in weakness, but in a wave of terrible, clarifying rage. The doubt, the fear, it was all burned away, replaced by the fire of a mother betrayed. She turned to the security guards, her voice no longer a CEO's, but a commander's. "Lock this floor down. No one enters or leaves this room. No one." "Ms. Velez," the guard began, confused. "Now," she roared. The guards, startled by her ferocity, immediately moved to obey, one speaking into his radio while the other secured the door. Aliana rounded on Julian, her eyes blazing. "You," she whispered, the word dripping with venom. "You did this. You poisoned my daughter." "This is absurd," Julian blustered, trying to regain his footing. "He faked that call. It's a trick." "Oh, it's no trick," Aliana said, her voice dangerously calm. She walked to the medical cart and picked up the amber bottle. She turned to Nurse Agnes, who was huddled by the wall, trembling. "Agnes, who gave you this bottle?" The nurse stared at Julian, her face ashen. She burst into tears.
Mr. Velez," she
sobbed.
"He said he was worried."
"He said he wanted to have it tested for safety. He took the bottle from this morning and he brought this one back. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." It was over. The lie had completely unraveled. Dr. Thorne, seeing his escape route closing, made a desperate move. He lunged for the door.
"I had nothing to do with this."
The security guard blocked his path.
a hand on his chest, stopping him cold. Aliana walked over to Rylan. Her hands were shaking, but her eyes were steady. She gently, tenderly took Nia from his arms. She cradled her daughter close, kissing her forehead. "It's over, baby," she whispered. "Mommy's here." "It's all over." She looked up at Rylan, her eyes swimming with tears of gratitude, of apology, of 1,000 things she couldn't say. The janitor she had fired. The man who had seen the truth when she was blind to it. The man who had just saved her daughter's life. "Get them out of my sight," she said to the guards, her voice shaking with emotion. "And get the police up here, now." As the guards escorted a sputtering Julian and a terrified Dr. Thorne out of the room, Rylan watched, his own body trembling with the adrenaline crash. It was done. The war was over. He looked at Aliana, who was now sitting on the floor, rocking her daughter gently. Nia's eyes were closed, but her breathing was evening out. The poison would wear off. She would be okay. Aliana looked up at him, across the quiet playroom floor. In that shared gaze, an entire universe of struggle, fear, and now, profound relief, passed between them. A bond had been forged in the fire of this nightmare, something stronger than an alliance, deeper than gratitude. It was the beginning of a new, unspoken story. The aftermath was a blur of flashing lights and quiet, authoritative voices. Julian and Dr. Thorne were led away in handcuffs, their faces a mixture of disbelief and ruin. The playroom, once a battleground of lies, became a sanctuary of hushed relief. Medics checked on Nia, who was sleepy but stable, the heavy sedative already beginning to recede from her small body. Through it all, Aliana never let her go. She held her daughter, rocking her gently on the floor, while Rylan stood watch, a silent, steady guardian by the door. When the initial storm passed and the police had their statements, Rylan finally knelt beside them. "She's going to be okay," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. Aliana looked up at him, her face tear-streaked but clear, as if a veil had been lifted. "Because of you," she whispered. "How can I ever?" "You don't have to," he said, his gaze unwavering. "We're okay. That's all that matters." The days that followed were a quiet revolution. With Nia free from the poison, her body began to wake up with astonishing speed. The first week, she was standing, holding onto Rylan's hands, her shaky legs locking into place. The next week, she took her first hesitant step, a shuffling, clumsy movement from the sofa to Aliana's waiting arms that felt like the greatest journey ever undertaken. Rylan was a constant presence, no longer an employee, but a partner in this miraculous recovery. He brought Isla with him every day after school. The two girls, Nia and Isla, became inseparable, their laughter filling the sterile penthouse with a life and warmth it had never known. They drew pictures together, played board games on the floor, and shared secrets in whispers. For the first time, Nia had a sister. And for the first time, Isla saw her father not as a tired janitor, but as a hero. One sunny Saturday, 4 months after the arrest, the four of them were in the park. Isla was pushing Nia on the swings, their giggles carrying on the breeze. Rylan and Aliana sat on a nearby bench, watching. "I never thought I'd see that," Aliana said, her voice soft. "I had given up on ever seeing her run." "She's not running yet," Rylan smiled. "She will be," Aliana said with absolute certainty. She turned to him, her expression serious. "The board settled everything last week. Julian has been completely divested. He took a plea bargain. He'll serve 7 years. Thorne lost his license and is facing a mountain of lawsuits. And you?" Rylan asked gently. A small smile touched her lips. "They wanted me to step down, offered me a golden parachute. I told them I wasn't going anywhere. Velez Financial is a family company, and I'm the head of this family. We're restructuring, creating a new charitable foundation for pediatric medical ethics. She paused, looking down at her hands. It's the least I can do. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the girls. Rylan, Aliana said, her voice hesitant. What you did for Nia. You saved her. You gave me my daughter back. You gave us a future. I just saw something that was wrong, and I couldn't look away, he said simply. That's the point, she said, turning to face him fully. No one else could see it, or no one else cared enough to look. You did. She took a breath. I don't want you to leave. Ever. I want us to be a family. All four of us. It wasn't a business proposition. It was a plea, raw and honest. It was the CEO, the powerful woman, letting her guard down completely. Rylan's heart, which he had guarded so fiercely since his wife's death, cracked wide open. He looked at her, at this brilliant, fierce, and vulnerable woman who had fought alongside him. He looked at their daughters, playing together as if they'd known each other their whole lives, and he knew he was home. He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers lacing through hers. I love you, Aliana, he said, the words feeling as natural as breathing. Tears welled in her eyes. I love you too, she whispered. The wedding was 6 months later. It wasn't a grand society event. There were no press, no executives, no fanfare. It was held in the small, sun-drenched garden behind Aliana's city home. Rylan stood at the simple floral arch, wearing a tailored suit that felt foreign but right. Ila stood beside him, his proud, beaming best man. And then the music started. Aliana appeared at the end of the aisle, looking radiant in a simple, elegant white dress. But no one was looking at her. All eyes were on the little girl walking in front of her, Nia. She was dressed in a pale yellow dress, her dark hair flowing. She walked slowly, deliberately, her steps still a little unsteady, but she walked on her own. In her hands, she carried a small red ball on a satin pillow. She walked the length of the aisle, her face a beacon of pure joy, and presented the ball to Rylan. He knelt down, his eyes level with hers. For me? He asked, his voice choked with emotion. She nodded, a huge grin on her face. You dropped this, she said, her voice clear and strong. Rylan laughed through his tears, taking the ball. He stood up, turning to face Aliana as she reached him. He took her hands in his. When I first saw you, I saw a CEO who had forgotten how to feel, he said, his voice shaking slightly. And you saw a janitor who didn't know his place. She smiled, squeezing his hands. And now? He looked past her, at their 2 daughters standing side by side, holding hands, and then back at her beautiful, open face. Now, he said, his voice filled with a love and certainty that filled the entire garden. I just see my family. The janitor who had been fired for rolling a ball, the CEO who had been blind to the truth, and the 2 little girls who had found a sister in each other, all stood together under the warm sun. The past was a scar, but the future was an open door. And together, they were finally ready to walk through it. And so, our story finds its way out into the world. I always love to think of these tales finding a home after I send them off. If you feel like sharing, I'd be honored to know where this one landed with you tonight. A comment with your city or just a simple hello from your part of the world truly brightens my day. If you'd like to be a destination for future tales, the best way to ensure they find you is by leaving a like and subscribing. That notification bell is like putting your name on the map, so the next story I send out knows exactly where to go. Until our paths cross in the next chapter, be well, and thank you for listening.